What's going on, Founder University? I'm excited to bring you our episode today. It's with Emiel, the CEO and founder of VendorPM, which is one of the leading PropTech companies in the world. We cover everything in the episode, but I think the three things that you can take away from this episode, which would be super exciting for you and hopefully valuable, is hearing the story of someone who doesn't come from the tech world and how they transition from the service industry to being a tech founder. How to go from zero clients to some of the biggest brands and names in the industry, and how you can get from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100. And really talk about and get into deep dive of the idea of bootstrapping a company versus going the VC route and raising capital. So I hope this is interesting to you. I hope you gain a ton of value from this, and thanks for tuning in. Till next time. Right into it, Emiel. And I was looking at our background. So for anyone who's listening, Emiel and I got connected a long time ago. I don't even remember how we got connected initially, but I was looking this. I don't know if you remember this, but I was looking via email, and I think we got connected maybe to talk about sales or startups or whatever it was when you guys are early on. And I saw the data of it, and it kind of threw me through a loop. It was 2020. So a year after you guys founded was when we initially spoke. And it was me, you, and your co-founder talking about sort of outbound and sales and stuff like that. And before I hit record here, we were just talking about how the business has grown so much in the 5+ years it's been from like startup to growth. And now you sort of have, I think, as you call them, leaders and lieutenants in each department. So I'm excited to catch up, one, but two, I'm excited to talk about the growth that you've been through, because I'm sure if we did this in 2020, the stories and ideas and stuff that you would have had back then compared to what you have now are a little bit different. But yeah, thanks for jumping on, and good to catch up.
Yeah, of course. Likewise. And quick correction, actually, the business was incorporated at the very end of 2019, but we functionally got to work January 1st of 2020. So you were one of those very early advisors, mentors, people that we genuinely looked up to, that we sort of connected with in the very early days of VendorPM. And I kind of did the same. I went back and I looked at our history. And it's crazy how, you were there, right, pretty much from day one, and now.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I guess I should have been there earlier. Maybe I should have invested. Instead of my time, I should have given you guys money early on, but that's exciting. But we'll go through. I'm sure people will look at your background, but I wanted to jump into one thing, which I think is very unique for you specifically. Yeah. You're in PropTech now, software. You guys are a leader in the space with VendorPM, but that's not your background, which I always think is very interesting. Is like, as a founder in tech, like you were in the service industries before, in Windows and stuff like that. So I guess to sort of open it up, I would love to hear from your perspective, like how VendorPM came to be, or at least the idea behind it, because you're not a tech person from your background historically, but you've become that over time. So yeah, I'd love to hear sort of the story before this, which we never really spoke about, is your service experience and being in that industry personally before starting something to solve that problem.
Yeah, of course. And, I'll speak to it more than just the professional history and background. I'll share a little bit about the personal side, because as you get to know founders, over the years, you start to understand who they are as people, and you kind of piece together some of those early chapters in their life. You're like, yeah, no wonder you land up in the situation you are in. It's very easy to see how these things can sort of compound and take people to where they are today. So, I think like the first chapter in my life, early days, of course, was being a swimmer. That was all I cared about. When I say I was obsessed, I mean like painfully obsessed. I was competing almost every weekend. I was training twice a day, every single day. Speedo, cap, goggles, like the whole 9 yards. The Olympics was the only thing that mattered, and I was convinced that I was going to go to the Olympics.
What was your specialty? What was your go-to? Were you a freestyle guy, backstroke, or what?
Freestyle, but distance. So like I remember, I think the first time I competed at nationals was the 1500. It had to be the 1500, of course. And it was, that painfully sucked. But yeah, that was a lot, it was a lot to sort of think back on in those days. But when I think about how that chapter set up the subsequent chapters, I think it really had to do with a few key things. Number one is like this obsessive nature. I think back to like how obsessed I was. Like if I wasn't in the pool, I was watching Phelps, race, like YouTube videos. And I think about how that obsessive nature carried over to things like VendorPM. It's just like I eat, sleep, breathe. Like that's the only thing I think about. Is you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're writing an idea that you had in your sleep, because subconsciously it's the only thing that's going on. So, number one is sort of that obsessive nature. Number two is I think it's just that work ethic and grit. And, I think that that was fundamental in going from 0 to 1, which is a very painful and difficult journey. And it's just that like relentless discipline that gets you there. And It was just on another podcast where I was talking about this. There's a big difference between motivation and discipline, and motivation fluctuates. Discipline is that consistent foundation that you can lean on. And I think that foundation was built in those swimming days. But anyway, there's a lot more to unpack there, but make a long story short, swimming was all that mattered. Unfortunately, sometime in high school, my father fell ill, quite ill, and I wanted to do something to help, to support the family, and something that I think could have a little bit more of an impact. And almost overnight, I switched. I stopped swimming and I started my first business. And this was alongside my co-founder today, Dylan. He was knocking doors. He was going door to door selling window cleaning. And so I joined him and we started this window cleaning business. And we're functionally kids in high school. We grew this window cleaning business throughout high school, throughout university. We grew it far larger than we had any business, doing at the time. We were, again, this is in Canada, so we've got winters. Yeah. And so this is like really a seasonal business. We're servicing over 10,000 homes a summer. We had 80 employees at one point, and we were just in way over our heads. But I think that was awesome because, again, it taught me the fundamentals of leadership, of building a team, of getting everyone focused and united on a goal, of setting a target and achieving it. And that experience ultimately is what led into the world of commercial real estate, because that was a residential window cleaning business, predominantly door to door. You're selling to single family homes and homeowners. That eventually grew to a point where we started working with property managers, right? And so then now you're talking about commercial real estate, office, retail, residential, apartment buildings, the list goes on, right? So getting into the commercial space, we came to understand two things. One is that, number one, the amount of money that property management companies spend on service vendors is unimaginable. It's over $600 billion a year in North America alone. And I don't think people really understand how large of an industry and how large of a business that is. And then you sort of peel back the layers and you're like, this is this massive industry, but how does it actually work? How are vendors and property managers working together? I think it's kind of what you would expect when it comes to commercial real estate and service vendors. It's very antiquated. Email, Excel, word of mouth, handshake deals, very, very relationship based, which is not a bad thing, but it's ripe for disruption. You can really leverage, the benefits of a people-based relationship-based business, but there's so many efficiencies to be had, whether it's in data or workflow and so on and so forth. So that's ultimately what bred the vision for VendorPM, which is to modernize the way that vendors and building managers work together. And that's what brought us to January 1st of 2020, when ultimately.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm like trying to remember a couple of things in that story, because there's a couple of things I want to go back on and then come forward to the pivot to commercial. But I guess going back to the beginning of it, you were saying that people, founder to founder, they have this obsession and they're sort of, this is their wiring, and you see this consistently from founder to founder. If they have that obsession, the likelihood of them being successful is obviously a lot higher. In your opinion, or I guess your personal experience, do you think that obsession and competitiveness is, at least for you can speak to, like naturally wired, or was that something you think you learned and developed over time? Like, what's your take on that? Because I always think it's interesting to hear this sort of nature to nurture debate, because I agree with you that skill is pretty uniform across founders. But I wonder, from your perspective, do you think it's something that you were born that way, or you sort of developed it over time?
Right. So your question is fundamentally coming down to nature versus nurture. I think that we are all predisposed to any set of character traits, if you will. I think some of us, it is easier to access. Some of us, it's more relevant or prevalent in. But I guess the point that I'm getting at is, I think it exists within all of us. Is there is some aspect of it that is genetic, as in, am I more predisposed to this? Can I tap into this easier? Is it more second nature to me versus something I really need to pull out of me? But then I think the vast majority of it is nurture. Is you are a byproduct of all of your experiences leading up to this exact moment, right? And so were those experiences that brought out those elements of you within you. I think back to what would have happened if my dad didn't, get sick, and that completely changed the course of my life. What job would I be in right now? Would I have gone to the Olympics and stayed swimming, or whatever it might have been? Now, coming back to your question, I think that given, likely some aspect of nature, and then nurture early days being, let's say, swimming, I think that I was very much someone who, if I did something, that was the only thing I did. I was incredibly obsessive about it, and that's all that mattered. So I think that sort of underlying foundation would have remained true regardless of sort of what would have happened at those inflection points. But I guess to summarize, I think you can't ignore the nature sort of components or aspects of this. However, I think that it requires the life experiences, the chapters in your life, to be ones that that require discipline to build that foundation that you can compound on and grow. The saying, the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. And I think that for those individuals that have obsessive and intense sort of tendencies, I think that is not just true in one aspect of their life. I think that you look at some of these, let's just use founders, because that's obviously what we're talking about, those that are just like brutally obsessed about what they're building. And ultimately just obsess about building, period. They could be building this business today and that business tomorrow, but they're just all in on it. I think those are the same people that like probably have very small circles when it comes to their friendships, and they're like very, very close with their like one or two best friends. They're people that probably obsess like crazy about their health, and they're all about their human protocols and biohacking and all of that. Like I think that's just a tendency that is true across every aspect of their life. It is not just true to building a business and the sort of the founder side of it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree, because at least for me growing up, I was always growing up, and maybe it was school that did it to me. I always thought it was sort of binary. It's like you're either intense or you're not intense. You're either good at math or you're not good at math. And for me personally, like I can only speak from my experience growing up, like I was a very shy, sort of timid, quiet person in school, and I was never really good at school. But I actually think it's probably a 30-70 split of like nature versus nurture. And I'm in favor of nurture. And really exposure therapy is where I think like the best way people do this. Like I didn't have any background in sales. I hated speaking to people, public speaking. I didn't really have a lot of confidence coming out of school because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really have the background, but through the repetition exposure to sales and getting rejected or whatever it may be, like you grow that skill set. And it's sort of like you think of like a build a player in 2K or a video game. It's like you can increase these skill sets over time, but you don't just increase them by waking up. Like you increase them by doing them and being exposed to them. So I think you're right that there's an underlying, which if I had to put percentages to it, my take is like there's a 30% underlying of nurture and nature of who you are, but then 70% is like exposed to, and what you push yourself to do is really going to dictate how much you grow in those certain areas. But it obviously varies from person to person, but that's what I think has been my take on it so far.
So first of all, it's funny you say that exact split. That's sort of what I had in my mind. Granted, this is not an area that I study, so that's just my personal hunch. But when you look back to your journey, was there, like on the nurture side of things, was there a clear moment that when you look back in hindsight was the inflection point that kind of kicked off this nurture journey for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a specific experience or action or whatever, but my first sales job. So I started my career in commercial real estate on the brokerage side. So I worked at CBRE in the brokerage side, and in these big brokers, like, and we'll get into the industry because you're obviously very familiar with it. Like it's extremely old school. I was on a 7-person team. I was like the 7th or 6th in command on that team, and everyone is 50 years older than me. And it was sort of, you show up at your desk, you do your work, and you see you later. And there was no pushing out of the boundaries. There's no trying new things. Just do exactly what you're told and just put in your time. And then I left and I started sales at Top Hat, which is an ed tech company. And I absolutely sucked. But they, to their credit, they had like very basic sort of guidelines and training at the time, and they just put you on the phones and you had to learn by doing. And I remember, like, I don't know if you get this feeling, but whenever I'm embarrassed or I do something wrong, like I start sweating and I get like faint, and I sort of just feel that sort of pressure building up. And I remember it so vividly, sitting on the sales floor, and I was just getting roasted by professors. I was fumbling over my words, and it was just a really bad experience. And then over time, I found my footing and figured it out. But the big thing that I found with Top Hat is our big sales process was going in person on campus. So picture this, you're like I was 23, 24 at the time or whatever. I'm flying across the US, going onto these huge university campuses with 50,000, 100,000 students. And I'm meeting these professors that are teaching 1,000-person lectures or whatever. I'm trying to sell them software. I'm this little kid. I just graduated from school. And doing that all the time was truthfully the biggest confidence builder for me of like, hey, I can fly to LA. One of my schools was UCLA. I can go onto UCLA campus. I can meet with a professor, earn his trust, sell this product to him, and make 100 grand, 50 grand for my company. And that was like, if you keep on doing that, you keep on being exposed to that, it's impossible to gain confidence. Well, you're either going to fail miserably and you're going to lose all your confidence, or if you're successful, you're going to gain confidence. And for me, I was successful at Top Hat. I was successful in the role. So I think it was not like a silver bullet moment. It was like a lead bullet moment of like my point before about exposure. And I'm sure, and you'll have to speak to it as well, because with VendorPM, like you guys were grinding in the mud for a long time. And now you look at your roster, it's like Colliers and CBRE and all these big brands that you guys work with, Dream and all this kind of stuff. What was your, like, did you have a tipping point specifically when it came to earning that type of business, or was it sort of just keep on pounding on the door and building relationships over time?
Yeah, there's not necessarily one direct or clean answer to that, but when it comes to what it takes and what was required to, let's say, get to the point where you are earning the trust of some of the world's, or at least the country's most credible and significant brands in real estate, I think that there's a few factors. One is persistence, and there's good persistence, there's bad persistence. Of course, it was a very healthy persistence that built trust. And so what I mean by that is, let's just use some of these clients that we have today, but we didn't in year 1, 2, or 3 of VendorPM, for example. That doesn't mean that I wasn't talking to them in year 1, 2, and 3, and that's where the persistence comes in. So these are companies that I was like insane year 1. My co-founder and I, we had this rule, like every day we're each doing 100 dials minimum, like regardless of how many meetings you have that day or whatever it is that you call into a different time zone at night, like we're doing 100 dials a day minimum. And that just like, it got the word out so fast. And it just started all of these conversations, some of these conversations that then last for 4 or 5 years in some cases, right? Because yes, you close some good accounts in year 1 and 2, but like if anybody thinks that they have an exceptional product in year 1 or 2 of their existence, like they're fooling themselves, right? Regardless of how strong your technical or product team is, it's just a function of time and resources, right? So we knew that we didn't have like the most robust product that solved for every use case and whatever it might have been. But you start those conversations early on, and you continue checking in, and you're really, you're not selling, you're consulting with these prospects, and you're understanding like, okay, you told me that, in year 1 or 2, you said that, you really like the fact that we can do A, B, and C for you. But in order for this to even work with your workflows and your staff or whatever it might be, X, Y, and Z also needs to be true. And I just wanted to let you know and show you that, okay, I actually built X and Y for you, and I'm now working on Z. And so let's touch base again in 6 months and talk about how Z looks. And then like, if that actually brings together what it is that you require. And it's like this, like, they know that I'm checking in with them once a quarter or once every 6 months. And then I'm coming back to them with like every single time with like really, really valuable pieces of information. It's not me just, hey, I'm just checking in like an annoying follow-up. It's like, no, like here's something you asked for that you said was valuable to you, and we've delivered it. And so it's that consistency. And like that's where, you being a sales or revenue leader, like you'll appreciate, of course, like the value in data. And when I mean data, I just mean notes. Like very clearly defining like this is exactly what they require, so that you can come back to them in a year and say, you said A, B, and C, and I did A, B, and C.
100%. The interesting thing that I was going to say with that, and being in revenue and sales, I know this, but I think a lot of founders who aren't in sales are missing a big part of this, because you were talking about having a meeting, talking about A and B, and then following up and talking about M and Z and whatever. But you also didn't mention that you probably reached out to them 35 times before you even got that A and B conversation. And that was the funny thing, is when I speak to a lot of founders who doesn't have that sales background, maybe they're technical or whatever it may be, and they think you only have one shot to message a company or reach out to them or put your best foot forward. And it's such bullshit. Like if you reach out to someone and they tell you to F off the first time, like, guess what? You're going to go back in 3 months and 6 months and 9 months and 12 months and whatever. And I think some people have the perception in sales, or at least founders, that like you're a nuisance or you're bothering these people or whatever. And if you're not solving a problem or you're not providing value, then you might be a nuisance. But guess what? You're going to solve problems if you're doing it the right way for some of those people, and you're going to gain business. And if you're willing to do it, you're going to get the business. And if your other competitors or whoever aren't willing to do that, then they're not going to get the attention of these people. And I see that all the time where founders are like, hey, I have this lead list. I need to craft the perfect email and I have to come up with the perfect strategy. I'm like, guys, like you just got to do 1% will get back to you. And then next time you go and hit the 99% that didn't get back to you and you try again. Like, I think that's a really big part of like, yeah, you're right. And I think a lot of business struggles with this is like, once you get them on the phone, that's the fun part, that you can solve problems and have conversations, but getting them on the phone is the hardest part. And I actually think nowadays, which I'd be interested to get your take, is it's just getting harder and harder because data is so accessible and everyone's inboxes are filled all the time. It's so easy to get in contact with people. So everyone's just getting spammed like crazy. For you guys, early days, like what was your growth tactic, or how did you guys find the most success of sort of getting those first meetings? Because I think a lot of times, especially early stage companies, that's like the biggest problem, is generating that initial.
Part of it was just pure brute force. And then part of it was deeply methodical and strategic. So, first of all, the fact that I lived and breathed this industry, it provided some aspect of an unfair advantage. And what I mean by that is, number one is like, I obviously had a network coming into the industry. And so I could literally call, maybe I didn't know the VPs or the C-suites that I actually needed to sell VendorPM to. I knew some of their staff at the site levels, the property management staff, the operations staff, but I'd pick up the phone, cold call and say, I have worked with your team. I have experienced this problem with them firsthand and I have built a solution. 15 minutes is worth your while. Let's talk. Like that was a script, right? And it worked because there was maybe not a direct network to that individual, but there was a network to their company, like deep one. And I would either leverage that for introductions up or just go directly up and then be able to reference it. So introductions are really good. Obviously, building a valuable product, which you obviously you spoke to, that solves a real problem, it's of real value, and you can get that in the hands of a few key people. They become your advocates, and it's not just like, you can't just say that I've built something great, Daniel bought it, and now Daniel's going to like go and tell the world. Like, there's like some strategy behind this. Like, hey, Daniel, like I know you're really close with this person. Could you help broker an introduction or whatever it might be? And I think this from your days in CBRE, very relationship-based industry, and having a few key logos and a few key individuals that are very well known and respected, it goes a long way. So being able to align yourself with the right people really catapults you there. But, if we're specifically talking about those early days of going from 0 to 1, like it was pure brute force. I remember, working around with a few other startups in like a shared office space. And they would always be amazed at how, me and my team would like just be, while they're, like sending emails or coding, whatever it might be, like we were the ones pounding the phones, and like we were obnoxious and annoying because we're just on the phone all day and they're like, who are these guys? But it worked. Like we're the ones that broke through because of this pure brute force. And like, I do think that to some extent, and this is kind of part of the leadership conversation we had before we started recording, I think to some extent, this, you kind of have this spectrum, which like 0 to 1, like you can get a lot done just by like white knuckling through it and just like grinding through it. That becomes far less true. That's just a less higher leverage activity as you continue scaling and the team grows, and like, every one contract doesn't move the needle as much anymore. And you do need to be a lot more methodical. But I think if like you really boil it down to one key thing, going from 0 to 1, it's brute force and white knuckle. Yeah. It's the only way. And that, by the way, that gives you what you need to learn in order to be methodical and strategic as you scale past it.
Yeah. Everyone hates that answer, but I'm happy you said it because it's so true. And from my experience, the exact same thing. Like that's early Top Hat days was banging the phones. All the other companies I work for is like early stage startup. And truthfully, my company now, Townley, like our first clients were just like through just cold emails to people I knew, trying to get introductions, like just trying to find a way to land those meetings. And unfortunately, everyone's looking for sort of that secret sauce where they can turn a key and like inbound start flowing in, but it doesn't work like that early day because no one knows who you are. No one gives a fuck. So you have to put yourself out there, but you're right. As the business grows, and I'm seeing that now going into year 2, is like, now I have a Rolodex of clients that know me and can make introductions, or I know industries or roles that I should go target that are more strategic than others. But when you're early and you're just trying to get to 0 to 1 or a million in revenue or whatever your number is, it's really just hard work. And I actually think it's good that brute force is the way to do it, because a lot of companies, a lot of founders aren't willing to do the brute force. And if you're not willing to do it, then the likelihood of you being successful is way lower. And I think everyone sort of idolizes these product-led growth companies like Slack or whatever, where people sign up for a free account and it sort of spreads like wildfire, which is early on, like, guess what? Slack didn't grow like that, but they're this massive company and now they have that product-led growth motion. But the amount of like YC companies or startups are like, oh yeah, I'm going to put it on Hacker News and I'm going to get all this revenue. I'm like, that's not how it works early on. Like you have to grind. But the fact that that's the barrier to entry is beneficial to the people who are willing to grind and grind for a long time. Like it's not, you don't do it for a week. As you said, like every day you guys are going and making 100 dials. I'm sure there's very few people that were doing that.
So I guess there's two aspects to that. So I've started to do some angel investing, and despite how incredible the company is coming out of YC, whatever it is, like if the team is just purely product and engineering, like I wouldn't make the investment because they're lacking that key component that like there might be outliers, there's exceptions to this rule, but I think they're lacking that key foundation that allows you to go from 0 to 1. That's the first piece. And I realized I didn't actually do your question full justice there, because you asked a lot about like how to also break through the noise. You talked about how the fact that people's inboxes are just overflowing these days and it's all spam. And you're completely correct. The human brain really operates in, we'll call it patterns and systems, if you will. And so we are programmed to ignore emails that look a certain way, ignore calls that sound a certain way, because our mind as a heuristic will automatically label that as a sales call, and our mind has a typical response to that. What breaks through that? Like whether it's in a sales context or it's in everyday life, you remember the things. I mean, your mind is processing everything that's happening around you through all of your senses. You remember novelty, whether it's in a work capacity or it's in a personal capacity. If you go to the gym every day and one day you see someone that's like wearing a onesie and looks like a giraffe or whatever, like you're going to remember that. It's novelty. It breaks that pattern in a system that's operating on autopilot. The same is true for sales. And so that's also where we really broke the molds as best as we could. And that's forever evolving, because things that were novel today are going to be.
Do you have a specific example of that, like a novel approach you guys took?
Yeah, I think that there's 3 interesting ones that come to mind. One is videos. So I won't say who, but there was a CEO of a massive real estate company, and there's no world he would ever respond to an email or a phone call from me. This is like year 1 or 2 of VendorPM. I had done like a Loom or a Vidyard and sent that video, and it was ballsy. Like I took a risk. It was a very professional risk, but like I said, like I made bold statements, bold predictions, and he responded almost immediately, acknowledging how much he appreciated this novel approach, and that company has become a great client, investor, and many other things. So anyway, the video is a big one. An extension of that, which I never did this myself, although I'd like to. I think it was a fund had did it that wanted to work with us. They got someone they knew I liked or respected, whatever, to do a cameo.
Yeah, I've heard.
And so it was a video.
I've heard people do this before. I've never done it either.
I think that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And then even something as simple as, like, let's say, Dan, you and I were on a team together and we wanted to close CBRE, right? Messaging, like on LinkedIn, let's say the prospect, but in a group chat, because all of a sudden it doesn't look like every other LinkedIn DM to sell you something. Like there's very few LinkedIn group chats that I have. And so like, that's a novel thing and it catches your attention. These are weird little things, but if it can elicit novelty, you will get somebody's attention, and then it's up to you to create value.
100%. No, it reminds me of a couple of things, and I think those, and not one campaign is going to work successfully or not or whatever, and you have to try a bunch of different things. But it reminds me of like a couple ones. I don't know if you've heard of a company, and they got my attention, called Sendoso. Have you ever heard of them before? Mm-mm. They're like a sending gifting platform that's built in. They like integrate into your CRM or whatever. And at the time, I was director of sales for a company called Platters, and they tried to get our attention. And one day I got to my desk and there was a box on my desk, and it was a Toronto Maple Leaf like bobblehead. And all the note was is like, hey, like go Leafs go from Sendoso. And then the next day I got an email from the Sendoso rep saying, hey, I hope you enjoyed your gift. Like, would this be helpful to get your clients' attention as well? I'll show you how Sendoso works. Guess what? I took a demo of Sendoso. It was just like such a personal approach and very unique, and it was super interesting the way that they did that. I don't know how. I guess they just assumed I'm in Toronto and was a Leaf fan or whatever. But for my business, which is something else that worked really well for us, which might be, I don't know, valuable to you or someone else, because in our business, like we are working with South African talent. We're helping North American and UK companies hire South African talent. And the question that I always ask myself is like, you have all these potential buyers, but who is most likely to hire South African talent was sort of the question that I asked myself and over and over and over again. I had all these hypotheses. And one of my hypotheses was probably CEOs or founders that are in North America, but were originally from South Africa. They want to support their home country, similar culture, same language, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm an absolute genius, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh shit, now I have to go figure out how to do this. And we ran the campaign and we actually cross-referenced graduates from the top 6 universities in South Africa. So on LinkedIn, if their education was from South African universities, but their current location is in North America and their title was CEO and founder. And we ran individual Apollo campaigns for each university. And our average reply rate was 22%, which is unheard of. But to your point about novelty is like, I can't run that forever because there's not an unlimited amount of CEOs who graduated from South African universities. But to your point about novelty is like, they are never getting a message saying, hey, like I saw you're a graduate from UCT, this is what we do, and have that personal connection, University of Cape Town. So I think you got to try different things and try to be creative. And the way that I sort of approach it is like, if it works, great, you're going to be able to generate revenue. If it doesn't, you're in the exact same spot you are today. So there's no harm in trying these new things. And the same idea with you shooting your shot with that Loom video is like, worst case scenario is you bugged him on that day, but in 3 months or 6 months time, you're going to approach him again with a different message. He's going to forget all about you. So there's very little downside. But you have to be comfortable with rejection. I think that's where most people don't have sales backgrounds, are not comfortable with rejection. So they aren't willing to try these things or put their neck and their name and their face on the line.
Yeah, look, just like anything else, like just like working a muscle at the gym, like rejection is mental or emotional muscle that needs to be worked. And it can't just be something that you fear. Like you need to embrace it. But I think that at that point, you know, we're preaching to the choir. Like I think that is a cliche that is well understood. It's just a matter of, you know, coming back to discipline. Some of the other things we talked about. Do you have what it takes to work that and accept that as a daily part of your practice?
100%. I guess shifting gears a little bit, which is, I want to go back to something you said that you started to do angel investing, which is interesting on a whole side level. But as a founder, like there's many ways you can whatever, bootstrap your business. You can raise like seed round, you can run VC money, you can just acquire a business. Like there's tons of ways to go about business. And I wanted to bring up one thing as you're an investor, but you've brought on, I don't know how much now, 20, 25 million in funding for VendorPM. I plan on bringing on zero funding and sort of bootstrapping and growing the business as big as it can go without funding, but we're in completely different worlds. I wanted to get your take on, not VendorPM specifically, but like your take on funding versus non-funding and when to sort of flip that switch or how to think about it, because now you've had years of going down the VC route, but you've also early days sort of went out and gritted it out as well with very little money in the bank. So what's your take on sort of going the VC route versus whatever, maybe angel investments or even bootstrapping?
I didn't know any better is the reality. Funny little story here, and I'll make it a quick one. When I first had the idea for VendorPM, I called up a friend, because VendorPM as a tech solution, I call up the only other person I knew in tech. And this person had built and sold a tech company. It wasn't a massive outcome, but they did. And so I figured they must know a thing or two. And they said, you know, okay, I like this idea. one of the investors that I work with is hosting this event at 111, which I'm sure anyone in Toronto is familiar with. And he's come to the event, and you should talk to the investors. So anyway, it was a panel discussion that the investors were doing or whatever it was. And I went up to them after with this guy, and he's like, okay, pitch them. I'm like, I had nothing prepared. I just barely had an idea that I told you about like a day ago. And I pitched them, and he's like, this is a Thursday night at like 10 p.m. He's like, okay, my office Monday morning, I want a deck, a demo, and a pro forma. You can bet that I didn't sleep from Thursday night until Monday morning. And I show up and I pitched them. And again, there was obviously a lot more nuance that happened between now and then. But long story short, I ended up getting the investment.
So your first VC pitch, you got investment from your first VC?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And for what it's worth, not to sort of go on a side quest here, but for what it's worth, I think, in fact, I know a lot of that had to do with the fact that they knew I didn't have a whole lot, but they saw that I was willing to do anything and bash through brick walls to get it done. And again, just coming back to what it takes going from 0 to 1, they saw that and they go, this guy can go from 0 to 1. I have confidence that he's going to figure it out, right? And we're talking anyway. So that was sort of how that started. But before I knew it, like, you're on the VC treadmill, right? Now you've raised money, and once you've raised money, you're sort of, again, not being a tech founder or a founder that's raised venture capital in the past. You're kind of just told, like, this is the path you go down. You raise this round, then this round, then you grow, and then you raise that round. And so it was one of those things where, like, just being candid, it was sort of, I was down this path before I even knew it. I'm like, how did I get down this path? Would I do it exactly the same way all over again? Likely. Would I have, maybe structured the timing of certain deals differently, or the terms and amounts? And yeah, like, sure, like that's anything anybody would, first time or fifth time founder, like, that's just, everything's obvious in hindsight. However, building technology is expensive. Getting and winning a market and getting to a certain scale is expensive, and that requires capital. And beyond just the capital, there's value in what the capital brings. I mean, for example, Bessemer, our largest investor, they're a very well-known and respected fund. And as a result of working with them, we've been able to get access to other companies that are great partners or sources of knowledge. We simply have a higher credibility profile when it comes to talent. Like, do people want to work with a tech company that's been funded by someone they don't know, or the VCs behind Shopify and LinkedIn and Twitch and DocuSign and Wix? And, like, obviously that's just more compelling. So there's a lot of upside to it. But I think if I'm to actually answer the question as directly as possible, I think a lot of founders raise a lot at high valuations and just simply go down that path because that's kind of just what's accepted. You're like, that's just what you're supposed to do. And I think just really, really challenging, why am I doing this? Like, realistically, if you have ambitious growth goals, right? So I'm saying, like bootstrapped or venture backed, like, you have the same growth ambitions. Under that context, raising money is a bad thing. Yeah. You have more stakeholders, you have less equity, all these things. So if you can get there without raising venture capital, that's an obvious answer. But if, for all the reasons I said, I mentioned why we went the way we did, if those reasons will propel you to achieve that faster, better, cheaper, then yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But be intentional and very thoughtful about it. And I know that sounds obvious, but I think that a lot of people are just sort of thrown down this path, and their Series A investors expect to go to the Series B and C, and, like, everyone wants to liquidate at some point. And so I think you just need to be more thoughtful and intentional about it.
You say it's obvious. I actually don't think it's obvious. And I think it's a good thing you're bringing it up, because what is obvious is that people see TechCrunch articles and news publications of raising these funds and stuff like that. And these are all private companies. So no one shares the profitability or their EBITDA, the revenue, whatever it may be. Everyone shares their funding rounds. And I think that's the general public persona, is like, hey, if I'm in tech and I raise money, good. But I don't think that's the communication that's happening behind the scenes. And it's obviously changed over time. When the tech industry was sort of booming, it was all about just going and chasing and burning bridges and spending as much money as you can to try to grow as quickly. And now everyone's getting caught. If you raised money in 2020, 2021, whenever it was good, everyone's sort of chasing their valuations, because some markets have come off significantly. But I think it's a good point that you bring up about the treadmill. Is like a lot of people don't know, especially young founders. Like I wouldn't have known if I started my business early on. And I've pretty much only been in VC companies, and I've had one that was acquired. I had one that's at like Series F now, which is crazy. I have a couple of them that turned to zeros. Like it happens. And I think the one thing you didn't say, but one thing I would add to that is as a founder, I think you should understand like what game you're playing. And if you're playing the $1 billion company that you want to build, then you have to go VC. Like it's pretty much mandatory if you want to build $1 billion company to go the VC route and grow crazy big. If you're in the service industry or you're in something like that, you can grow strategically. If you think about Constellation Software, which is like one of the incredible company, and all they do is they hold vertical tech businesses that for the most part are bootstrapped and profitable. Like you don't have to go the VC route, but you're right. And for the most part, once you go down the VC route, you're on the treadmill and you got to keep on raising more money. You have to keep on growing. But I think the big part that you said is you have people to report to and a lot of voices and opinions at the table that you have to deal with. Which is interesting. And now you're on the opposite side of it, being an angel investor. So hopefully you're a benefit at the table, but you're right. It definitely can open up some doors and make some intros, especially strategic investors. Like for you, if you have investors in the commercial real estate space or property management, like that's an ideal partner. On that point as well, and it's interesting because you said you're angel investing. I wanted to sort of shift gears because I love talking about and thinking about, like I literally have a notes app just about random business ideas and different things that I would work on or I think could be great businesses if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now. And you obviously have extreme exposure to PropTech and in that industry, but I'm sure you have a million different ideas out there. Are there any like big business ideas or problems that you think you'd want to solve or any interesting business ideas that you sort of want to throw out there you think someone else could run with and create a pretty good business?
I think this comes back to the obsessive, intensive nature that we spoke about at the very beginning, just bringing this full circle. I actually don't have this roster of, a bunch of ideas that the second VendorPM that I'm starting this. Like I as maybe extreme and wrong perhaps as it is, I believe that any second I spend thinking about that is a second I'm not thinking about VendorPM. What I do enjoy thinking about is maybe even more from like a philosophical and psychological point of view is just like, what does the future of this world look like? And whether that is a business, that translates into a business idea that I believe in or one that I would enjoy being a part of is not really what I'm referring to. One area that I think about quite frequently is, this loneliness epidemic that no one is this isn't news to anybody anymore. But I think about, specifically the use of AI and the AI revolution as it pertains to this loneliness epidemic and what that is, if that's going to have a net benefit or a net negative for humanity and society. I think about the fact that, whether we're talking about AI as, let's say a quote unquote software versus hardware, like the robotic side of it, like there's many nuances in that. But, imagine you could have again, like we're not talking very far away from now, but like a robot, an AI robot that becomes your friend, becomes the solution to this loneliness epidemic, if you will, that can definitely, serve as various, emotional needs or gaps that society currently has today. I think that is almost an inevitable outcome. I mean, you give somebody a lifeline when they need it, like they're going to take it. And this is a very appealing lifeline in those situations. And so I think that is going to become a very interesting future. I don't know if that actually has a net negative or a net positive. You could argue, I think it's very, very similar to like the social media argument. Like we're more connected than ever, but lonelier than ever, right? Like I think you're going to see a very similar pattern prevail here where you're going to have like people that are so like intimately connected with their technology. This is really just the extrapolation of like social media right now. You have like this personal friend or partner, whatever you want to call it, both in like potentially a hardware form or a software form that will further remove you from other humans in society likely, but allow you to be, quote unquote, more connected. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think that's a big question if that's going to have a net benefit or a net negative. But I almost see it as an inevitable outcome, an inevitable future for our world, just given the way that if you look at like two variables in particular and the way they're trending, AI and like the robotic side of it as well, along with loneliness. specifically amongst younger men, and the way that's moving. I think that like those an inevitable future where those two things cross and intersect.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's inevitable. It's going to come, and if you try to push back against this evolution of technology or whatever, it creates a lot more friction. The thing for me is like I can't think about if it's going to be good or bad. No one knows. And the second you start thinking down those plans and you sort of set your opinion on one side or the other, like you're just screwing yourself. And I think that's the interesting thing is like I'm a big believer in technology and everything is like in the embrace strategy and not the prediction strategy. Is like I don't know if these AI companion robots or whatever form they end up coming in, is it going to be like an AirPod you're wearing constantly? It's just talking to you and supporting you. I have no idea. Is it going to be a chip in your brain? I have no clue. Is it going to be bad, good or bad? I don't know. But when it comes out, maybe I'll try it. Maybe I won't. Like I use AI every single day for my business and it helps me a ton and saves me a ton of money and helps me strategize and come up with different things. But what I really not despise, but I think something that everyone should be aware of is like being scared of these things is not going to help because it's coming eventually. The best thing you can do is sort of embrace it or try it or expose yourself to it. And it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 60, like it's not that hard to put your finger on something and see how it could help you or not. But I'm always a glass half full kind of person. And I think a lot of things with AI and as you said, like robotics even, it's like, oh, they're going to take our warehouse jobs or there's going to be no Uber drivers anymore because they're all going to be autonomous. It's like, yes, you can look at it negatively or you can look at it positively. Like if every car is self-driving, there's going to be less accidents, less people are going to get killed or whatever the situations may be. But I think I always think about the positive impacts on it. And like in my business as an example, AI I use every single day to save myself a ton of time, provide a better customer experience for my customers and the candidates that we have. So it's been beneficial, but I think with any evolution, there's going to be pros and cons. Like the paper industry got roasted by the computer. Like it happens in evolution, like things, there's going to be winners and losers, but I think if you can embrace it or at least put yourself in a position to take advantage of it, there's huge benefits. And I guess for you, are you a big daily AI user for your like personal life or for VendorPM, or how are you guys leveraging it today?
Yeah, but I think we're leveraging it in well, in our product, first of all, like there's, overnight everyone became an AI powered or AI forward XYZ. And I think that when we come back to sort of the concept of novelty, I actually think that like you've got to the point now where it's like this overly used buzzwords that people are actually putting up their wall because they've seen too much vanity AI. So for us, it's definitely a slower, steadier approach. Is like, is this truly deeply valuable? Like, yes, it needs to be something that cool, exciting, and everyone's like, this is novel, and it provides immense value. So I definitely think we're like not jumping in, 2 feet first, the same way that you see a lot of the industry or just the general technology world doing so. Number one, and then just personally, I think that like, look, there's a saying that I'm sure everyone's quite familiar with, is that you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to someone that knows how to better use AI. At least as it stands today, and I know this is changing quickly, I see it as a tool, like one of the most valuable tools in your belt. And so, do you have the best tool, and do you know how to best utilize it? And that's how we think about it. It's how that's our operating principle when it comes to AI, both within VendorPM internally and externally to our users.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think for you guys, you're in a great position. Like the way that I see AI being the most beneficial for end users is not actually net new AI usage and platform. It's actually more AI integrations into your existing workflow. So people using it, or like you log into Salesforce and it automatically adds notes to the platform using AI. Like that is more beneficial because, and as an example, like I was a heavy Salesforce user for my CRM in my old company. It's like, if there was an AI CRM, would I uproot my entire Salesforce integration and build out to go move it to this AI CRM? Or would I leverage an AI integration within Salesforce that's already in there? Obviously, I'd rather stay with the existing platform and benefit. And I think that's where all these businesses and services are going to become way more efficient. Like for us, a super simple hack that we use that saves us a ton of time is like we're constantly recruiting talent. And one of the parts of it is we would have standard templates and job descriptions. So we posted last year over 300 job descriptions and wrote 300 job descriptions. We figured out what template performs the best. So what we did is we created a custom GPT within ChatGPT where we uploaded, I think, like 20 job descriptions that performed the best over the year. And we taught the GPT to learn that structure. And moving forward now, every time we need to write a job description, we only have to provide the GPT with 3 inputs, and it automatically produces the job description in the perfect format that we know performs well. And we don't have to write it and do anything. It's like, it's not a massive update, but it saves us 30 minutes every single time we need to make a job description, and takes us 30 seconds. So I think little things like that add up a ton over time. Like we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 custom made GPTs that we use all the time just to save us time. Like it's not revenue generator or anything like that. It's just time savers.
Efficiency. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the way. It's like, focus on your business, focus on building out your client base, and then use some sort of AI or whatever, some sort of automations within your platform to improve the customer service. Don't try to uproot them and tell them to go use this AI version of your company. It's like, hey, no, just use our software, and now it's going to have more value due to the integration of AI. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. That's my take on it. Everyone thinks it's going to be like this destruction of the old and in with the new. I actually think it's going to be the expansion of the old by leveraging the new. Appreciate it. We'll speak soon.
Cool. All right. I appreciate you. See ya. Bye.
See ya.